Alright, so I am going to pick up where we left off last time with the discussion of Exodus, and now I'm going to talk about where we came from and the Garden of Eden. And I'm going to talk about a model which is inclusive of all schools of thought, because some schools of thought basically think that, or teach that, I'm drawing a landscape here with like mountains and rivers and stuff. Some schools of thought teach that, or I should say one school of thought teaches that, God just snapped his fingers and that we appeared and and fully formed. And then another school of thought teaches that we were like, let's draw the schools of thought here. I'm gonna do Adam and Eve over here. I guess she's got some hair. That dress. And then, so one school of thought teaches Adam and Eve. Another school of thought teaches that we were jungle apes on the edge of the savannah. And that we basically were like scurrying around trying to get some leftover scraps of like dead carcasses, and we're trying to like scavenge for some like rotting old leftovers and stuff, and I guess like compete with a super dangerous hyena and all sorts of other stuff that we can talk about in another lecture. But anyways, these are like the two ideas of where we came from. And what I'm going to show is that not only that do these both have a lot in common that they both agree on now, but that we can form the model of human origins. We can show the model of human origins just based upon that common ground that they all share. And it's a generalized model that everyone can agree on because it's so obvious and so self-evident. Like, it's so obvious I don't even have to cite references, because it's like saying that the sun comes up in the morning. It's that obvious. And it's weird because it's been right in front of us all this time and we've just never noticed it for some reason. It's been in the room with us for thousands of years and we've just like not noticed it somehow. But I'm going to point it out. All right, so we're going to start by talking about where animal intelligence comes from. I should draw some forests in here, like trees. The worst trees ever. All right, so parrots have to keep track, a lot of parrots and birds have to keep track of vast landscapes, and they have to remember like how to get from their breeding grounds to their feeding grounds and things like that. And so they have to keep these very advanced mental maps in their head as they're flying around their landscapes. And so they're kind of like idiot savants, if you will, because they have to keep these really advanced mental maps in their head, but they don't necessarily have to be too terribly intelligent. And so that's kind of like these artificial intelligence systems, in certain areas are really powerful, but then as far as general intelligence goes, there's not a lot going on. But that's kind of like a lot of bird species, how they have to keep track of stuff. But if you then branch out and you take it to the next level and you no longer do like what a toucan would do and just eat one single type of food or only a few types of food, like just one type of berries basically for your entire existence, and you start to eat a variety of things, then you suddenly have to keep track of more. Like you might have some berries on a bush over here, and you've got like some some like acorns and nuts and things over here, and then got like some mushrooms over here, and you just got a bunch of like random things. There might be some like eggs over here that you can exploit, or some tubers and roots. It can be all sorts of random things throughout a landscape that a more omnivorous animal can take advantage of. And if you start to branch out and do that, then suddenly you don't just have to keep track of a very advanced landscape. You now have to keep track of specific food items within that landscape. So it goes from being a three-dimensional map in your head to being a many-dimensional map. You have to know which foods are in which places, what times you can exploit them, how to exploit them, which ones are safe, which ones might be dangerous, how to crack the nuts, when to do this, that. There's all these other dimensions you have to keep track of. So now, when you become this generalized omnivorous feeder, uh, the amount of mental power you have to have just explodes. You have to become much more intelligent. So it basically selects you for intelligence. And this sort of natural selection and adaptation is perfectly fine with all schools of thought, because, we can all look and see that things like dogs exist, and that if you breed for certain traits, you get more and more of those traits. That's something that we can all agree on, and we all do agree on this adaptive version of natural selection. So this is how you get the highest levels of intelligence, when you have to keep track of all these things and exploit these different things at different times. And this is called a forager, quite simply. Foraging animals are the most intelligent animals in the world. Is it on screen there? Barely. Let me try that again. Let me try to be a more intelligent animal. All right. And even if you're just like a half forager, like a honey badger, it still makes you way more intelligent than your hunting counterparts, like lions and hyenas and all that. Like if you give a honey badger a problem-solving task, they figure it out astonishingly well. And if you give like a lion or a hyena the same task, they will just tend to get frustrated and either shrug their shoulders or just walk away and stop caring. But a honey badger is like a brainiac compared to its hunting counterparts, just by virtue of being a half forager. Because a honey badger is still a half hunter, but it's also a half forager. And even that one half still launches them into a whole other level of intelligence. And so that's where your first dimension of extreme animal intelligence comes from. The next place it comes from is from pair bonding. Whenever a species starts pair bonding, the males and females will team up together as a team to take care of their children and to raise them and stuff. And what happens is the women will actually select which male they want based on not just the old school things like health, fitness, immune system, all that sort of thing, but they will start selecting their men based on their ability to provide for them. They become, providers, and that's a big deal. All right, so pair bonding providers. Now, once this happens, the males of a species have to basically compete for their ability to be a forager. In this case, when we're talking about foragers. And so the females will select which ones are better at foraging, which is indirectly selecting them for more intelligence. So you get the superpower of foraging, and then you supercharge that already superpower with pair bonding selection. And so that's when you really start launching into the hardcore levels of intelligence. And one of the ways we see this is with, let's see if I can draw some eagles, some proud eagles. Probably not a very good eagle. Got these big, strong hands. The eagles, it almost looks like more like a vulture. The eagles will pair bond, but they will pair bond based on their ability to hunt. So the lady eagle will choose her guy based on how good of a hunter he is. But with other species, such as the corvids, I'll just write that down. The corvids, like the crows and ravens, is they will pair bond, but crows and ravens, corvids in general, are foragers. So hopefully my crows and ravens don't look the same as my eagles. So you got your crow lady and your crow man. Not to be confused with the Cro-Magnon. And these guys are foragers, but these guys are hunters. And the eagles, like the male, he'll go out and he'll fly around over the water and spot fish, and then he'll go down and like snatch a fish and bring it back to his lady, and they'll stay together for about a year. And then if he's good, she'll keep him on for another year. If not, she'll look around for a new guy. But with crows and ravens, the lady selects the guy on how good he is at foraging for her. And one of the ways he proves how good of a forager he is not just by bringing food, but also by bringing little presents, like little shiny gifts, like pebbles and things, like unique looking ones. And that's basically his way of saying, look, I'm good at finding stuff. Will you parry me? And so the crows and the ravens are an order of magnitude more intelligent than the eagles. They are way more intelligent than the eagles, and we can go on and on and on. All of our ancestors recognized just how distinctly clever the crows and ravens were. They always have held like a very sacred place in our history. Like even Neanderthal seemed to have revered the crows and ravens above just your average animal in general. And that's because they do all sorts of phenomenal things that we could talk about forever. Like, they'll trick other animals into fighting one another so that while those two animals are distracted, they can go and snatch their food. They will, they'll like learn how to call a dog so they can use that dog to like run through a crowd right at lunchtime and get a bunch of people to drop a bunch of food that they can go in later and pick up. And or like some crows in some places have actually like trained wolves to hunt with them, sort of like we trained wolves, which became dogs, to hunt with us. They're extremely intelligent animals, and it's because they are super foragers. They go all around their landscape. They fly around all over the place, and they exploit a huge variety of things. In pop culture, they've mostly been associated with scavenging aspects, like coming in and getting like leftovers of carcasses and things. But really, they are foragers. They're not scavenging is not their primary thing. That's just like one of the little offshoots of the fact that they're foragers. And this explains all kinds of things about us. Like as a forager, you tend to cache food away and keep little pockets of it secret and hide it in different places so you can have it for later. And then you have to remember what you got, where you left it. You have to also make sure no one's watching while you hide it. So that's part of why we have this instinct for privacy. It's for being foragers. I'm kind of jumping the gun here and adding us into the picture, but we're gonna get there eventually. So this explains a lot about an animal once you know it's a forager, and you know the sort of strange behaviors that might seem peculiar in the animal kingdom. But anyway, so the first level is to become a forager, then to become a competitive forager in the form of a pair bonder. I should write that, like a competitive forager. I'm gonna misspell this. Where's my spell check when I need it? Competitive forager. And then the third level is the fact that you are actually raising your children together. So first you become a forager, then you become a competitive forager through things like pair bonding specifically, but then as a pair bonder, that also by default sort of slots you into the third and final level of extreme animal intelligence, which is becoming, I guess we'll just spell it out, becoming co-parents, actually working together to raise your children. Because once you do that, it's no longer just mom raising the babies by herself. Let's put some little babies down here. Oh, that's not a very good baby. It's not just mom trying to do everything by herself. It's mom and dad working together. And not only are they both bringing them food together, but they are also mentoring them together. So they're not just feeding them together. We'll call it providing. They're not just providing, they're also mentoring. That's a big one. They're teaching them and training them, like teaching them their skills, especially dad, like he's teaching his foraging skills. He's passing that on to the next generation. So this is also like the birth of culture when you start, when you really start amping up that habit of passing things on. I mean, foragers in general, well, animals in general will tend to do this. Like mammals will tend to like teach our children stuff, especially, and a lot of birds. But like once you become a forager, it really starts to step up because you teach your kids about finding stuff and where to find things and how to exploit things and like how to like mash up the fruit so that you can get the most out of it or something, or how to like crack the nut. But then when the teaching really ramps up is when you start co-parenting together from pair bonding. So those are like the three levels, like foraging, number one, competitive foraging pair bonder, number two, and then co-parents, mentoring is number three. Those are the three tiers of like ratcheting up your animal intelligence. And that's what crows and ravens do, and that's why they're so incredibly intelligent. I'm trying to think of some other funny stories from crows and ravens, of all the little tricks they do, and like they'll just like a crow or a raven. I didn't draw this very well because eagles are like way bigger than crows and ravens. Like an eagle is massive compared to a crow. A raven is a pretty big bird, but like an eagle is like even bigger. So eagles are like, bruh. And they have these huge, powerful talons. And a crow will just come waltzing right up to an eagle and just like steal his food right in front of him. That's supposed to be a fish. That's not a very good fish. Oh well, let me just do it like that. Got a little fish here. A crow will just walk right up and just snatch the eagle's food right from under him, even though the crow knows full well that if the eagle for one instant got his super powerful talons on him, he would just destroy him immediately. But he's not worried about that because he knows he's an entire order of magnitude more intelligent than the eagle. And he'll just kind of like, let's give him like a serious look here, the eagle. But like a dull seriousness, like not very bright. Zoologically, if you had to choose from which animal you wanted as your mascot, if you wanted the features of strength and stuff, sure, you could go with an eagle. But if you wanted like cleverness and intelligence, you'd want to go with like a raven or a crow or something. But yeah, they'll just walk right up like it's nothing and just blink, just steal their food and walk away. Just no big deal. And then the eagle will be like what the hell just happened? But it's funny too because like one of the things that's sort of quirky about humans is like we'll sit around and observe other animals, we'll like watch animals as if we're not one of them and just sort of observe and study them. And we'll sort of like just by default think like, oh, what a silly animal. But what's funny is that's exactly what crows and ravens will do. They'll just like sit around and watch the other animals and they'll just like have that look on their face like, oh, what a silly animal. And they'll like even regard them like that. That's not anthropomorphizing or whatever. That's what they actually do. They just sit around and observe things like, oh, look at these silly animals, like just like humans do. So we're not unique in that aspect. But anyway, this is where extreme intelligence in the animal kingdom comes from. So let's see. And foraging is a big deal, or rather, pair bonding is a big deal. Now we're going to talk about another dimension of all this. So, pair bonding, let's give ourselves some room. Pair bonding is actually more rare in the animal kingdom. Usually, most species are like alpha type species where the males will basically square off to see who's the biggest, baddest, strongest, and they'll fight and determine who's on top, who's the alpha, and then he'll just sire all the females, and then pretty much all the children of the next generation will be from him. And so this is not the best recipe for genetic diversity, and this is definitely not the recipe for intelligence. Alpha style animals are not a recipe for intelligence. Is that even on the screen? Yeah, okay. But pair bonders are a recipe for intelligence. Versus, let me bring this down. And initially, when we started out as a species, we would have been an alpha style animal. And because in the beginning, no matter what you believe about our origins, we did not have the knowledge of good and evil. But in order to have knowledge of good and evil, that means you have to have a higher level of intelligence. Like you have to basically lose that innocence of naivety. And so the saying that we gain the knowledge of good and evil is sort of like, let's turn this into a tree, because trees are bushes, really. They're just bushes that had to get up extra tall because too many animals were eating them, so they had to get up bigger. All right, so there's not the best looking tree ever drawn. So at some point, we gained the knowledge of good and evil, and that is an increase in intelligence. So something increased our intelligence, and different people have different ideas, but I just explained how that happens in nature. And that's just the way things are, by the way. None of this is theoretical or my own idea. This is just how nature is. I mean, it's easy to go and look it up. So that's how, in nature, anthropologically, a species becomes selected for more intelligence. But we would not have started out like that. We would have been simpler. And when you are simpler, that makes you an alpha style species. And so, again, in the beginning, the beginning, we would have been an alpha style species, and um, it would just be males like competing to see who's the toughest, and you know, whoever wins gets to be the alpha, the king for a season. And the females in that world, let's just call the males in that world the alphas, like that's their first name, the alphas. The females in that world, let's just call them the Liliths. Liliths, aka what I call the bro chicks. Because most females in nature, in alpha style species, they don't really have any emotional bonding to the males, nothing really substantial. So, like, they can breed with an alpha, like the big bad alpha, and then, like, another alpha can come along and just, like, kill him and replace him immediately after that. And then they just kind of, like, switch their focus to the new guy. They're like, oh, there's a new guy. Okay. So, there's not a lot of, like, emotional bonding going on with the Liliths in an alpha style species, the females. And so, and this is not a recipe for higher intelligence. And so, over time, uh, within these societies, these alpha societies, they tend to be hierarchically very stratified. So you'll have like layers. It's not just the alpha on top and then everybody else. It'll be more like a pyramid. It'll be like the alpha on top, and then there'll be these like other social castes within it. Maybe not that many, but there'll be a few of them. And then on the very bottom, you'll have, like the lowest level, and that'll be some of the males, some of the females. But in order to, if you're a male and you're on the bottom of an alpha society, you do not pass on your genes. If you're a male and you're on anything other than the very tip top guy, generally speaking, you do not pass on your genes. There's a few exceptions, like some big bad guys will kind of like sneak in the side and woo a female on the edges. But if the main alpha even catches a whiff of it, he gets like really aggressive and tries to find him. But anyway, generally speaking, the only males who get to pass on their genes are the alpha in those species. But then pretty much all the females get to pass on their genes. But you need something for basic survival that kind of helps you hang in there. So if you're a female on the lowest rung, you need some sort of like weird extra talent that helps you have just a basic survival advantage. And one of those talents that you can have, like some of the ladies over here, one of those talents you could have would be intelligence. You could be a somewhat more intelligent female on the lowest rung. And these females in a species like this will eventually give birth to a male, a single male, who is a bit of a nerd. He'll be physically a little more diminutive, like his mom. Even though his father was an alpha, like he'll be more. You'll eventually get a guy who's more like his mother, and he'll be a little more compact, if you will. Less. Not that being compact equals weakness, but in these alpha style species, they tend to, like, I guess, synonymize like size with strength and all that. But anyways, you'll have like a more conservative male, if you will, and he will be a little more intelligent. So basically a nerd. And what's the word I'm trying to look for here? Humble. That's he'll be a little more humble. Just like naturally humble. And I guess we could draw him. He'll be like he'll be a little bit of a nerd. And that'll be Adam with no neck. No neck Adam. Let's give Adam a neck. All right. And since fighting is pretty much off the table for him, he'll kind of like stick to himself most of the time and kind of like just meander around and see what's going on. And at one point, he might even make a little crow friend as he's going around. And then the crow friend might bring him a little gift at some point, because he might share some of his food with his little crow buddy. And then, as a thank you, his little crow buddy would bring him a little gift, like a shiny little pebble or something. And this might be the 2001 Space Odyssey monolith moment where the light bulb goes off and he has the epiphany, like dun dun dun, dun, and he realizes that he can actually attempt to impress one of the ladies with, let's make some ladies, let's make a lady over here, give her some nice lady hair and a dress. He could realize that he could attempt to impress one of the ladies, one of the Liliths, with gifts. So not only bring food to her, but also bring her like a shiny little present. And he literally might have gotten this idea from a crow. Let's call him Ace, by the way. Let's give him a name. Ace. The first guy who figured this out. And so Ace, he tries his hand at impressing a lady with presents, brings her some food, we'll just, I don't know, food. A plate of food. Brings her some food, brings her some gifts, and at some point he's going to be successful in this attempt to like woo a lady with gifts instead of fists. And he's going to get some genes in there. Those genes are going to pass on. He's probably going to be successful in this multiple times. If he's successful in it one time, it's probably going to happen again, numerous times in his lifetime. And he's going to get his genes into the future, and then multiple generations later, those genes will be distributed throughout the tribe. So even though he was never an alpha, he will still have his genes throughout the tribe, and like everyone will be like a partial descendant of Ace, we'll call him. And so eventually, and this he's a provider, by the way. Ace is a provider. That's what he's doing. The gifts he's bringing are the dawn of being a provider, and he's breaking from the alpha tradition and starting the new tradition of becoming a provider. And so this will continue on maybe sporadically into the future, and it'll eventually become more of a steady thing until you get a descendant of Ace who is much more of a consistent provider. Like, he's much more reliable. He's much more capable with what he's doing. This will be like, I don't know, Ace the Seventh or something. I don't know. Could be anything. But and he will meet a girl who will not be like one of the Liliths. Let's just call her New Girl. Let's call her, I don't know, Eleanor. So you'll have one of the Ace males and an Eleanor. And what's different about her is that she no longer is a bro chick. She no longer is just going to be accepting the best gift from the best Ace around and then, letting that guy get his genes into the future, like having a nice date night together and making new little aces. she's going to be different, and she's going to notice that this ace is really good at what he does, really consistent, and on top of like actually liking him, she's going to commit, and this is going to be a brand new thing. She's going to commit to him, and she's actually going to bond with him. So you're going to have Eleanor. I guess we'll write this with her over here. And she will bond. So before you had the Liliths, and they were like bro chicks, they were not bonding. And this was enabling the species to become more intelligent because the males still had to be competitive providers. Let's just write competitive. They still had to be competitive providers to woo the ladies and to win out over the other males. But that was basically the end of it. They weren't really actually pair bonding yet. So then when Eleanor comes along, she says, no, you're not going anywhere. You're staying with me. And so she hangs on to Ace over here, and they stay together. And then this gives them that massive advantage in the quality of children that they produce, because they will be feeding them together, and he'll be a stick around father. He'll stay there. He'll continue to provide not just for her, but he'll provide for their little ones too together. And then he'll teach them his foraging skills, secret family recipes and things, little foraging tricks that he keeps to himself, because foragers, we kind of like hold some tricks back for ourselves. And they'll work together to raise their children as a pair bond, and this will launch them into the final phase of animal intelligence. And so this is what you had. First you had the alphas and the Liliths. This was the beginning. In our simplest phase, the alphas and the Liliths. And then you got the aces and the Eleanors, or what you might call the Adams and the Eves, because Eleanor comes along multiple generations after the first ace, or what you might call the first Adam. And so you could say that she is made from the body of Adam, just like the Genesis story, which, if you didn't know, says that Eve was made from the body of Adam. And so in this anthropological version, it's not a surgical procedure, but it is nonetheless her coming from the body of him. And she replaces Lilith, bro chick. We should make a Lilith up here. She's like, I don't know. She's a lady, but she's tough. All right. So that's your Lilith. This is like a cave drawing here. And let's see. Let me grab another drink. Try not to cough. All right. So as I said, we now have the aces and the Eleanors replacing the alphas and the Liliths. And some people might say that's heretical. The Bible doesn't say anything about these alphas and Liliths. But it's interesting because the Bible comes from the Torah, which comes from Exodus, like we talked about. Starts in Exodus, where it was written, it starts. But it continues after the Torah, after the Exodus stuff, and it continues into the next phase that originally would be called like the Tanakh, and then other traditions spin off of that, and they have like the New Testament or the Quran or whatever, and these new traditions, Book of Mormon and all this stuff. And so there's like this branching out that comes from that original Torah. But the people who spawned the original Torah, let's draw an original Torah here. from Biblos, the Torah. See if I can write super tiny. The people who wrote the first Torah, the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, they too continued their own traditions that we call the rabbinical traditions. And so their Bible includes those rabbinical traditions, which went on for centuries. So they have the Torah, the Tanakh, and then they have their rabbinical traditions. So their Bible is actually like all of that extra stuff, basically, if you want to think of it in those simple terms. And in the rabbinical traditions, which are like a direct continuation of those original people who started it, which you might call a more advanced version of the original Bible, if you want to think of it like that. In the rabbinical traditions, they indeed have alphas and liliths. They're the ones who coined the name Lilith. That's why I used it, because that comes from them. And that's fascinating because that's exactly what they say. They say they don't call the first man Alpha. They have another name for him, but I'm not going to use that name because people conflate it with other concepts and confuse it. So I'm going to keep it very clear and simple and just call the first man Alpha. But they do have the first lady as Lilith, and Lilith does not bond. They say Adam comes along, or who I called Ace. Adam comes along, pairs up with Lilith, or, they sort of court one another, but she will never bond with him. And so this doesn't work out with Adam and Lilith. And so that's where Eve comes along. And we'll just say this is Adam again here. And Eve does bond with Adam. So Adam replaces Alpha, and Eve replaces Lilith in the rabbinical traditions. And that's amazing because that's exactly what would happen anthropologically for a species to become ever more intelligent. It's almost as if the story of Genesis, as continued by the rabbinical traditions, is a perfect allegory of an actual anthropological history of humanity. And you have all the detail there. You have, Eve coming from the body of Adam, intergenerationally, as it were. You have the race of man eventually becoming so intelligent that they lose that innocence of naivety, and they effectively eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they become intelligent enough to understand that some of their actions are indeed inherently bad and some are inherently good or better. So they gain the knowledge of good and evil through their intelligence. So you have the entire story right there. And then this enables them to start making weapons like spears and stuff. Let's just say that this is like a future generation. So they figure out how to like take bone and carve it into sharp edges or make that's basically like your first spear is like a sharpened bone and stuff like that. So once they gain that knowledge, they also gain the knowledge to make advanced weapons like bones and throwing sticks. The most famous one I think people are familiar with is the boomerang. Sorry about that art, it's not very good. But and this may seem primitive to us, like a spear and a throwing stick, but these in the animal kingdom are actually super advanced, and these are like very effective on a primitive level for causing a lot of damage. And so this is where we lose our innocence with these weapons, and then we get really good at like not just killing animals that we didn't used to kill, that we used to live, side by side with, sort of like gazelles and elephants. Like we could live in proximity to them and it wasn't an issue. We could just appreciate them for what they were, and we weren't trying to like mess with one another in any way. We were like benign to one another, sort of like pleasantly benign. We lose that innocence and start going after them for calories. And notice in this model too, We become intelligent and then we do that. We don't start doing that to become intelligent. We do this to become intelligent. And also, I'm going to launch into another dimension. There's so much going on here, it becomes hard to sort of like keep it super focused, but we didn't use land meat to become big brained. Chimps and bonobos, if you want to think of this in terms of an evolutionary model, they do in fact consume meat already. They hunt monkeys and these really cute little gazelles that live in the jungle. Sadly, hopefully they're just getting like the old infirm ones that are ready to be put out of their misery. But they do in fact eat meat already, and it hasn't turned them into us. It hasn't made them super intelligent like us. That's not what makes you intelligent as a hominin. That doesn't, the hunting, as we discussed, does not select you for intelligence. The foraging does. And the meat does not make your brain bigger. Selecting for a bigger brain is what will help select for genes which can use random stuff in your environment to produce a bigger brain. Like elephants will just eat like grass and stuff, but they have huge brains. So they're making these big brains out of just like grass. They're not even bothering with like land meat or anything. And so that's because they've been, selected to make big brains, because they have to, not only do you need a bigger brain for a bigger body to like have more basic like control circuitry to control just more body mass, but you also need a bigger brain as an elephant, because like the birds, they have to have the elephants are kind of like half foragers, because they have to keep track of, they're mostly grazers, but that they, like a forager, they have to keep track of like a vast area and like the opportunities throughout that area. And there's more going on with elephants, but anyway, the point with all that is making a big brain isn't about what you're eating, it's about how you're being selected. And for hominins, what's unique about us, pretty unique about us, is that we have, and this is 101 nutrition here, what I'm about to say. This is not like advanced cutting edge. This is like old 20th century knowledge. We as hominin humans, have to consume marine nutrition in one form or another, because only the marine environment, if you eat from the marine environment, it gives you this huge advantage in your ability to build a brain, because it has brain building blocks already in it. And so instead of having to use a bunch of extra calories like an elephant to build these building blocks that make your brain, it's just already in the diet. So you just eat those brain nutrients, and it makes it way easier for you to build a big brain. And people usually take fish oil to get this, the DHA and EPA. They usually just take fish oil to get that. And also, we have a dietary requirement as hominins, humans, to consume iodine in a sufficient quantity. And if you don't, your IQ just plummets. And so this is where the whole concept of hillbillies comes from. This is people who lived too far away from marine nutrition for too long. And let's make an ocean here. Let's just make this the ocean. So you have people living, I'm off screen. You have people living too far from marine nutrition for too long, and they literally get dumb and unhealthy. And that's a large part because they're not getting enough iodine. And they're not even getting like migratory river fish like salmon that come up from the ocean to spawn up in these rivers. Because that's one little trick that many of our ancestors figured out that enabled us to live inland is if we just periodically got some of these anadromous migratory river fish. I'll just write that out for the fun of it. Anadromous migratory river fish. Well, they're not really river fish, but we find them in the river. And this is things like salmon. If you catch them in a stream during the right time of year, you can get just enough iodine to keep going and for your brain to not implode, basically. And but if you're not even getting that, then you go full hillbilly and you just like you become more and more like dulled out through no fault of your own. It's malnutrition. And right now there are billions of people in the world with a B, billions of people in the world that are iodine deficient because they're not getting enough of some sort of marine nutrition. And this can come in many forms. As we talked about, this can come from fish, it can come from bivalves like clams, oysters, scallops, mussels, that sort of thing, which are super ethical, So if you're like very conscientious about, living a good life and not harming other beings, then you can consume things like bivalves with, no guilt and be okay with that. Or you can get like algae supplements nowadays that contain DHA and iodine. They're not as cost effective yet, but that's another option. And that's actually, algae is actually where this comes from in the first place. That's actually how this gets into the food chain for us to even get it from things like fish, is it's originally coming from algae. But anyway, so we as humans need our iodine and our DHA. This is why people take fish oil, and this is why in the grocery stores you see salt that says iodized or not iodized. That's because we figured out the hard way that we have to make sure we're getting enough iodine in our diet. And so we as hominins, our Garden of Eden, let's get rid of the weapons here. Our Garden of Eden, I'm going to change our reference back to Adam and Eve again. Our Garden of Eden, with our beautiful trees and fruits and nuts and all of that, was seaside, like we talked about in the last discussion about the Exodus and the Sinai area, and how that used to be like really beautiful and lush, like Hawaii, and why we as humans are psychologically attracted to places like Hawaii. It's because every animal is mentally, psychologically tailored to be in love with its natural habitat. And we've sort of branched out and picked up a little bit of other things over the ages, and like some of us can drink the milk from another animal's teats as full human adults, which is like a weird new mutation that some of us have, and just like quirky new things like that. And but at our core, we are a seaside animal. We are a Hawaii style animal. And we, even as far as our basic nutrition, have to have this nutrition from the seaside. And all of this other stuff, this transitioning from an alpha to a provider, and transitioning from a sort of atomized society or an alpha society, if you will, to a pair bonding society, this was all happening right here at the seaside. And this is becoming more and more acknowledged by mainstream anthropology just because of the basic nutrition. And I don't want to get too off on a rabbit trail, but some people think we can get this from plant foods, like an elephant, sort of, and just eat like the ALA in a plant food. We'll put ALA next to the elephant food here. Some people think we can just consume the ALA and our body will convert it into DHA, but our efficiency at converting this is not super great. If you're like an East Indian female from India, I think you can get like about a 20% conversion efficiency. But if you're like a Caucasian male from like Northwestern Europe or something, your conversion efficiency is abysmal. It could be down at like 1%. So this is not really a viable strategy trying to get our omega 3s. These are omega 3s, by the way. I guess I could write that. Our omega 3 fatty acids. Trying to get those from plant foods is not a realistic. Like you can kind of scrape by, I guess, but especially if you're like a Northwestern European male, you're flirting with trouble if you're trying to get by exclusively on that. And if you're worried about the ethics of where you're getting your DHA, like I said, you could get it from the algae supplements or the buy shells. Either way are ethically amazing ways to get what we need for as far as omega 3s go. So that shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, we're not highly suited for making that conversion. We are a seaside animal. We're not an inland animal. And also, this is crazy tenuous. This like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy idea that we we were like scurrying around on the edge of the savannah with like vaguely pointed sticks, I guess, trying to protect ourselves from the most powerful, efficient predators on the planet, like cave hyenas and Dinopithecus which was like a baboon the size of a grizzly bear almost, and had teeth like freaking daggers. Just like terrifyingly powerful predators, super lightning fast. And us like as just this freaking jungle ape, this jungle fruit animal, like trying to hack it out there with all these literal monsters. Let me see if I can draw a Dinopithecus. Draw. Just these monsters out here. Dinopithecus was like a real life werewolf almost. That's a terrible drawing, but whatever. So you had these beasts out here, and this is the most tenuous, wild idea ever. I mean, this was basically hatched by boomers, no offense, in the silent generation around World War II, which were sort of culturally conditioned to this like alpha male thing, like chest thumping, machismo, and the fact that like they were just kind of conditioned that like life was hard, coming out of like the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and all of it. I heard from someone from Canada call it the dirty 30s. That's a new one for me. And so they were just sort of conditioned in their generations that life was like crazy brutal, and you had to be all macho to survive, and life was just pain and suffering. And so like this to them seemed very natural. This like insane idea to them just seemed like, yeah, sure. But in nature, this is like so tenuous. This is so I don't want to use critical words. I'm trying to use like neutral words, but this is so chill and so natural that even little macaque monkeys like Curious George come down. See if I can draw a little monkey tail. They come down to the seaside and they get themselves clams. This is happening right now as we speak. Little macaque monkeys are coming down to the seaside, getting clams and eating them. It's simple, peaceful, stress-free, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. This is crazy wazy. something that rhymes with lazy. I don't know. So this makes all the sense in the world that we got our DHA and our iodine in a super chill fashion, just foraging at the edge of the water. And it doesn't require any of these like torturing logic or, you know, these theories that are still unproven that just have to be taken on faith. It doesn't require any of that. Like there are, this is why I'm not even citing anything, because like you can literally just go look up what I'm saying. This is happening right now, and it's the most straightforward thing ever. And all of this progression was happening here in a Hawaii type environment. All right, I had to clear the board and get some more room here, because now I need to talk about the fact that we are a seaside animal, and I need to make it so absurdly obvious that you will actually be annoyed that no one ever pointed this out to you before. All right, this is our seaside here. Got some palm trees bowing to the surf. All right. So, and this would have been in like our Sinai area, basically, as deduced by our last discussion in our last lecture. But so our entire body is specifically built for this exact application right here, being a seaside forager animal, and we'll just go through it. It says we're made in the image of God, and if they don't just mean mentally, but actually physically, then God must be a seaside forager too, because in our head we have our nasal cavity here. I got like our mouth down here. All right, so we've got our nasal cavity inside our head here, and uh, with apes, they have snub noses, and so they have basically a direct open line right into their nasal cavity that they can just suck air directly in, which is handy for enhanced breathing, especially during like sprinting and impulse activities. But this is not so great for swimming. This is one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that apes, non-human apes, hate water, is because if they go in the water, it just rushes directly into their sinuses. They have no protection at all. And then that just goes like right down the back of their throat. And if you notice, if you go and watch like apes being coaxed into swimming in swimming pools at zoos and stuff, you'll notice that they do one of two things. Like in the water, they either keep their face directly straight down. I guess that's my ape, that's my orangutan face. They keep their face like directly straight down in the water so that their sinuses are basically like an upside down cup in the water. Let me draw a cup here. And you may remember from childhood that if you put a cup underwater, this is our water level here. If you put a cup under water like this with air in it, it'll hold the air trapped inside. And so, like if an ape is coaxed into swimming in a swimming pool, which they naturally don't really want to do, but I guess it can be fun if there's a zookeeper there who they know likes them. They will put their head straight down so it'll protect it from water going in. Or if they're taught to like dive, as in go underwater, they will reach up and put one hand right over You can go watch videos of chimps doing this. You know, normally they have this like uh, their sinuses directly exposed, and they'll actually keep, no matter what else they're doing underwater, like picking something up for the fun of it to appease the zookeeper or whatever they're doing, they'll always keep one hand covering their nostrils so that they don't get flooded with water. And that's one of the biggest reasons why apes do not like water or swimming. We, however, are a special ape. We have a protection over our sinuses that we call a nose. And the whole entire reason for having a nose is specifically for this. So our entire sinuses can be like the upside down cup of air in the water. It keeps our sinuses from getting flooded with water when we are diving. Diving isn't just going underwater, not jumping off head first into something. That's why we have a nose. The only primates that have noses like this are ones that swim. It's called a diving nose. Why more people don't get taught this, I don't know, but it's kind of bizarre because we literally have a nose for swimming. The only other primates that have this are like your proboscis monkeys, which are the most prolific swimmers of all primates, not counting us. Then you've got other things like your swamp monkeys and your macaques have sort of noses that are moving in this direction, becoming like protected sinus covers. And those are the only other ones aside from us that have noses and don't have like that sort of snub nose that let me see if I can draw like a ape here. Apes have more of like a kind of a snub nose. So they have just that direct line right into their sinuses there. And so let's see, where was I going with this? There were theories proposed. There have been all sorts of different theories over the generations that have tried to figure out why in the world humans have this nose on the front of our face instead of like this. And they've said like, oh, it's for cold weather, and like that's what was taught, when I was going through like middle school or something, that like it was to help like warm the air as it went into our face for cold weather, which is kind of silly because a lot of people live in like scorching hot environments and don't really need to worry about cold weather very much. But in cold weather, you want to conserve your body heat, and so you want the surface area of your body to be as close to a sphere as possible to minimize the surface area of your body. And that's why people like Eskimos tend to be more like jolly, round, and cherubic. It's because that body style helps conserve your heat. What you do not want in a cold environment is to have like a maximized surface area like you see in hot climates, where you'll get a lot of like tall, lanky people, oftentimes. And a nose is the exact opposite of what you want in a cold environment. This actually becomes a major liability. This is one of the best areas to get frostbite, is on your nose in a bitter cold environment. And if you look at the primates, like the most cold adapted primates in the world are the golden snub-nosed, I think it's Himalayan monkeys. And those guys, they're super cute, but they have like this little like Skeletor nose. That's not a very good drawing, but they have no nose at all. It's just like flat. That's why they're called snub nose. Because if you look at them from the side, they're sort of like, and then it's just like their mouth and then their nose. They have no nose to speak of. And that's because in a cold environment, that is dangerous. This is not for warming air in a cold environment. This is danger, Will Robinson, in a cold environment. That's what you want in a cold environment. No nose at all. And then there have been other theories which would just get more and more sort of like reaching and tenuous, which, you know, people can be forgiven for reaching for since they were sort of like grandfathered up the wrong tree and didn't realize it, and they're trying to make the best with what they've got, unbeknownst to them. So, like the last one I think I heard was like that it was like for telling which direction a smell was coming from. But the best smellers in the world don't need that. But anyway, yeah, it's simple physics. That's where that comes from, and that's why the super swimmer primates, aside from ourselves, have noses like this. Like if you look at the proboscis monkey, let me just write that. These guys are super cool. If you look at the, people get proboscis. I'm not sure I spelled that right. The proboscis monkeys. If you look at the younger males and the females, they look like Dobby from Harry Potter. They look like a little house elf, and they have a nose very reminiscent of ours. You can tell right away when you look at them. People get thrown because they look at the males, the adult males, which have these like big gonzo noses, which is kind of like a lion's mane. It's like a way for them to kind of like show off their alphaness, basically. But and so like it's easy to like not understand the point of their nose. But if you look at the rest of them and not, you know, the more conspicuous one that draws your attention, but you look at the others, then you can much more obviously see the utilitarian purpose or the utility of having a nose on the front of your face. So, and it's weird, if you watch proboscis monkeys for long enough, you'll notice that they do a lot of things physically, the way they move their body and the way their body is structured, which is like eerily resonant and reminiscent of us. And it'll kind of like, if you watch them for long enough, you'll like start to get the chills at certain points, because like there's like something eerily humanesque about them. But anyway, so that is the point of our nose. And so we are going to move on to some other body parts that are a mystery. We also have these sort of funny straight legs. Our legs just come straight down, and then we have these big clown feet, which we don't think are clown feet because we're used to looking at ourselves, so we don't really think much of it. But in nature, our feet are silly. What we should have, especially if we were indeed this like savanna running super runner animal, what we should have not only would be pads for our feet, so we could run across Lego toys without it being the end of the world, and which we would have if we were indeed a super trekker, super runner animal, and not just an emergency runner like we are. But if we were a super trekker, we would have those pads on our feet, and that's not even debatable. We would have much more developed pads on the bottom of our feet. But not only would we have that, we would also have digitigrade style legs, or werewolf legs, if you want to call them that. So our upper body would be very similar, but then we would have werewolf legs. It's not very well drawn. uh, we wouldn't have these like straight up and down legs like this. This is silly. We would have digitigrade legs because I guess I could just write that. Digiti. Probably misspell it. Don't quote me exactly. Digitigrade legs. I think that's right. And these type of legs, like your dog's back legs and like most land animal legs, are like springs. You know, it's like they're basically walking on the what we would call like the balls of our feet or on the toes. That's their whole foot, and then their heel is up here, and then their knee is here too, but their heel is up off the ground. And this makes, and then their tendons are supporting their weight, and their tendons are making their leg like a spring. And what's cool about a spring is you can compress it and then it'll rebound on its own. You don't have to use any energy or force or muscle or expend any calories for this to happen. It'll just do it on its own. So as they step and they walk, their leg is like a spring, and they can like, they're basically like sort of bouncing as they walk. And that is excellent for trekking across land, just that ability to like bounce along. Or like if you see some gazelles that are just like boing, boing, that's not just a bunch of muscle power, that's a lot of spring ability. And it's not requiring nearly as much energy as it appears to be. And that is how your legs would be if we were indeed as much of a super trekker as they claim we are. But we don't. We have these legs. We have legs like a stork. And the reason we have legs like a stork is the same reason that a stork has these legs. It's so you can walk around. See if I can draw this in the water. Stork legs for doing stork things. That's so you can wade around in the water, and you can forage better in the water, and so you have a higher vantage point looking down into the water. Because if you're swimming in the water and your face is just right here above the water, your body's down here underwater, and your face is just right above the surface, then you have a lot of glare on the water, and also the way the light is refracting on the water, you can't see what's going on over here underneath the water. Like if there's like a fish over here, like you wouldn't see this fish. But if you have a higher vantage point, then you can see this fish much more efficiently, I guess, or clearly. So that's the point of being higher up like this than like a typical ape with their shorter legs and their slouched posture and stuff. It's not just so you can wade around in the water, it's also so you can have a higher vantage point. They say that, you know, they still teach a lot that this is for like being out on the savannah, their feet, and being able to like see over tall grass, see if there's like some stuff going on over here, some scary stuff. But if you're this close to grass in the savannah, you're already dead, because the true stealth lords of this world can come up in here so quiet you have no idea, and they strike like lightning. Like in the movies, they'll show like a lion squaring off with you as you're hitting it with your whip and stuff. But in reality, they don't just stand there and look at you. They creep up super stealthily until they're in range. This is an ambush hunter strategy, and then they get you like lightning, super fast. And so you would not want to be this close to grass. And they're built for that in ways that we are not. They can, I don't know, it's looking more like a dog than anything, but they're built for this type of stealth activity. Their head above their eyes is just barely above it, so that they can keep a low profile and stay down. and their torso is thinner. You know, we've got like this big like SpongeBob square human torso. They've got like this very thin profile. Like, you know, if you're drawing more accurate and not like a stick person, we're sort of like, you know, our torso is wider. And if you look at like a dog straight on, or you know, any of these animals, their torsos are much more compact than ours from side to side, and that's partly so they can be stealthy. And they have just all these features, like they can put their ears down, and you name it. They have their pads on their feet and their smaller step profile, which enables them to walk like super silently. I've got a buddy with a real wolf who was rescued from a breeding operation, but it was too late and he couldn't be returned to the wild. And so he has this like giant real life wolf that he goes around with. And um, I mean, he's a big animal. Like he's up to like the middle of my chest. Like, and I'm a good notch above it, the average height for a man, and his wolf Sonny is up to my chest. But he can move his massive mass around in just utter silence. It'll make your hair stand up. He can like bounce too with just without making a noise. It's amazing. But yeah, they are utterly built for stealth. And if you're out in the savannah trying to look over grass and stuff, you would not even want to be that close to grass in the first place. You wouldn't even have time to grab your spear with a launch out of the grass like that. And you know, you could argue this point, and there are some merits to this point, but this is not nearly as solid as one might think. And this is not even debatable. This is as clear as day. It's like if you've ever seen like an eagle eye view down into the water from really high up. You know, you can, or like a drone shot, like you can see everything in the water from like really high up. And we're not that high, but like just this difference from here to here makes a big difference in how well you can see into the water. And our feet, as I like to disparagingly refer to as clown feet, are they double as paddles. They're good enough for walking around on land, but they are also necessary to be the way they are so that we can paddle. We can literally paddle around in the water. And also, feet like this make it possible to walk across sand. Because if you try to walk across sand with feet like this, it's not fun. It's not a fun time. When you try to push off, it just like slides out from underneath your foot. But if you have feet like ours, and our legs are called plantigrade style legs, if you're curious, where it's just like straight up and down like that. It's like us and grizzly bears because they're all like big and heavy. And they don't necessarily need to be like ultra runners. I guess I'll write that. Let's see. For the fun of it. What was I saying? Oh yeah, if you have feet like this, very not fun to walk in soft sand. But if you have feet like ours, it kind of acts like a snowshoe. And if you don't push off with your toe as you normally would when you're walking, but you just let your foot roll off of the step, then you can almost walk across thick sand as simply as you can across any other ground, with like about like 90% of the ease of just regular walking. And that's what our big foot helps us with, which is kind of handy. We can walk with it, we can walk across sand with it, we can swim with it, we can paddle with it. It's like a multi-use foot, which is handy. And you can kind of sense it in our instinct that we do kind of have an instinct that walking around like this is better for running because like women like to wear high heels, which give them a sort of uh, more elegant profile like that. And so it's kind of like in our instinct that like this equals more of a an elegant looking land profile, if you will. So anyway, that's like the really crude crash course of our nose and our legs. And let's see what else. There's like a million things going on. Oh, our ability to sweat. Um, they say it's for like chasing gazelles and stuff. Let's draw a little gazelle flying along with their super ability to jump. Cute little gazelle bouncing around, and then like silly humans trying to trek after them in one of the most deadly environments on Earth for a human. They say it's for doing this, um, and that we sweat so that we can like stay cool while we're like persistence hunting. However, the best persistence hunters on the planet that make us look like a joke when it comes to this, uh, the African wild dogs and species such as this. These guys, see if I can do them vague justice. The African wild dogs and true blue persistence hunters, they don't sweat. They don't need to sweat because that's not how you stay cool on land, much less for persistence hunting. Land animals cool themselves by just breathing, and that's what they do, and they stay perfectly cool, and they are masters of persistence hunting. Sweating on land is insane. It's suicidal. You're losing tons of precious minerals and salts as you're doing this, and a lot of like marathoners and stuff will actually end up in the hospital or even die from an excessive loss of salt. I forget that there's a name for it, but um, yeah, I used to be a National League cross country runner, so that's something you have to be very careful of. And we have the advantage now of being able to carry around like electrolyte drinks and backpacks full of stuff and have convenient little checkpoints set up where we can have little cups of fluids and all that we can chuck onto our face. Uh, that was not on the savannah, and if you might try to argue that you could replenish your electrolytes once you catch your prey, if you catch your prey, but that's insane because hunting is never, nothing is 100%, and hunting is never 100%. So if you lost an enormous amount of salts from trekking forever trying to catch this thing, and then you didn't catch it, which very often you would not, you would just die. You would be dead. And so that the sweating to stay cool on land is a joke. It's a bad joke. That's not why we sweat. We sweat because the environment we're built for on a daily basis doesn't allow us to cool ourselves through our breath like most land animals. They just inhale, exhale, and they're like their legs, their lungs are actually resonant with the pace of their breathing. So when they're panting, it's not nearly as much work as it looks like. They're kind of like, it's kind of like bouncing basically, and they're cooling their self. We don't do that. We don't have that like panting ability to just like, like they do. We have to like force it, and like we can do like controlled breathing and stuff, which they don't really have the ability to do. But we don't have the ability to have that resonant breathing that they do. And but the environment we're actually built for requires us to be able to cool ourselves without the ability to breathe. That's why we sweat. We have to be able to cool ourselves without the ability to breathe. we have to cool ourselves through our skin while we're swimming. That's why we sweat. And in a marine environment, you don't have to worry about losing your salts and minerals. You've got all the salts and minerals you can handle, bruh. That's why we sweat. And also, we can see underwater without goggles. This is not very well known, but if you let little kids swim in water that won't sting their eyes, with like a bunch of chlorine, and it's just like, I don't know, like a salt style pool that stays clean with the salt instead of chlorine. It's just like basically a giant pool of saline solution almost. Or you've got a natural body of water and you let just little tiny kids swim around naturally and you don't put goggles on them and they swim like this like on a regular basis, like like a daily or almost daily basis. They just naturally pick up the ability to focus underwater. And I don't want to go too into that, but it's basically it's a superpower that we have as humans, but it comes from our pupils actually shrinking small. Because when you go underwater, it'll be a little dimmer. So if you're not trained for this, your instinct, your automatic muscle instinct, there's no thought involved, but your automatic instinct will be for your pupils to like widen, like big, so you can see in the darker lighting conditions. But what these little kids do who swim in the water all the time is their body just naturally realizes what it's built for, and it shrinks the pupil super small, and that changes like the refraction angles and stuff to where they can focus and see clearly underwater without the need for goggles. The Bajau people, and people spell this differently, but I think there's like different spellings, but the Bajau people are excellent. Is that even on screen? Barely. The Bajau people do this naturally, and they're a great demonstration of this phenomenon. And like people who live with them who are not even remotely similar to them ethnically or genetically or anything, who let their kids grow up, or not even grow up, but just spend time with the Bajau kids doing the same things and swimming underwater constantly. Doesn't matter where they're from, they pick up the same exact ability to see underwater without goggles. It's just a natural ability we have. So, seeing underwater, let's just write that down. Or more like focusing underwater. Focusing underwater. So we've got a nose. Oh, I guess that's what that's saying up there. A nose. We have an ability to see underwater. We sweat through our skin. That helps us stay cool underwater. And we also need to stay warm underwater sometimes because a lot of water is cold, and conveniently we have exactly that ability. We have white subcutaneous fat all underneath our skin, which makes our body sort of like a wetsuit. And it's funny because the other apes don't have that like wetsuit layer of our white subcutaneous fat under our skin is very analogous to the blubber layer of marine mammals. So we essentially have like our own blubber layer. And we also have around the core of our body inside, we have what is known as brown fat, and that exists to generate heat. And it's wrapped all around our vital organs. And it's like a muscle. It's like most things. Like if you don't use it, it's gonna atrophy. So if you're like on the Olympic as it's going, or the Titanic as it's going down in the water, and you haven't built up that natural ability to use your brown fat to generate heat, let's draw some heat, some infrared power. If you haven't built up that ability and you go down in the North Atlantic, you're just going to turn into a popsicle. But if you have built up that ability, you'll be perfectly fine. You could wait around for quite a while in that frigid Atlantic water and wouldn't be a problem. Um, and you would have survived. You would have still been treading water when rescue got there. And like the Fuegian Indians down in Patagonia, see if I can draw. Oh, that is a terrible South America. Florida. The Fuegian Indians, Fuegian, if I'm pronouncing that my Spanish correctly, down here would when the first outsider explorers got here, the Fuegian Indians used to they would just go in this frigid, because this is Antarctica down here. There's just like a hop, skip, and a jump from Antarctica. They would just go around and like just swim in this water, this frigid water, like buck naked, like it was no big deal. And they would even walk around in the frigid air like that too. But we have that superpower, that brown fat inside us, specifically for that reason. And this is becoming more of a popular thing now. Like people are taking ice baths and doing like Wim Hof method and stuff. I guess I could write that. That's two names there, Wim Hof. This is becoming more popular because people are realizing the health benefits of doing that and that we're built to do this. That's why we have that. It's not really acknowledged yet in that community, but that's specifically why we have that power, that superpower. So we can heat ourselves underwater with our brown fat. We can stay cool in hot water. We can stay warm in freezing water. And once you build that ability up with your brown fat, you actually discover that it is pretty much one of the greatest feelings in the world to go swimming in absolutely freezing water. It actually feels good. It sounds horrifying to the uninitiated, but once you acclimate to it, it feels so good. I can't really describe it. Brown fat for heat. Just write that down. So we have all of that, those superpowers, but we also have within us our spleen. Let's make him a little more 2D instead of 1D. He's stoked. All right. So we also have our spleen, and our spleen inside is a little scuba tank. It holds oxygenated red blood cells, and that's a much more efficient way to hold oxygen in you rather than just in a lung, because once it's dissolved in your blood, it can hold much higher concentrations in the same three-dimensional volume space. And so our spleen is like a little scuba tank, and like in people like the Bajau who still retain much more of our original seaside conditioning and selection, their spleens are larger than ours. Ours are kind of atrophied, but their spleens are a little bigger, and the Bajau people can stay underwater for 15 minutes, which is insane for being underwater. That is like an eternity underwater. And that puts us like on par with like dolphins almost. I don't remember, I'm going to butcher this. I'll probably have to edit this in later. But I think a dolphin's breath hold is like 20 minutes or something, if I'm not mistaken. And like we're on that order with them, which is crazy when we're properly conditioned for this. And we can train ourselves up even in one lifetime if we're not like in a group that retains more of the selection for this. We can still train this stuff back up pretty high enough. And but We have a spleen. Hopefully I spelled that right. We have a spleen scuba tank for diving underwater. So we have all these superpowers. We have underwater vision that we can use. We have subcutaneous white fat for insulation, like a blubber layer. We have visceral brown fat for generating heat. We have a little scuba tank inside of us. We have a hairless body. You know, our hair is just like a little peach fuzz. So for all intents and purposes, we are quote unquote hairless, unless we're Italian, but that's another story. So we have this like sleek sort of body for swimming underwater, or like a lot of East Asians who are self-described like dolphins, very very sleek bodies. So we have this. We have all these different features of us in our paddle feet, which are all highly suited for a sort of meandering, foraging, seaside existence in a very Hawaii-like setting, which, again, we are psychologically tailored to love. This feels like hell for us. That's one of the clues that it's not natural. That's one of the many, many clues that this is not natural. This feels like hell. This is not fun. I mean, you get like a little bit of a runner's high, but like aside from that, like this environment, this is not a fun day at the beach. No pun intended. So yeah, those are some of the highlights. I mean, there's so many things like our shoulders, like I guess I could mention that real quick, like a chimp's, see if I can draw a chimp skeleton here. A chimp's shoulders are linked through their collarbones at an angle so they can like hang from trees. But ours, and they're attached more firmly, that's supposed to be a chimp skeleton. A chimp skull. Ugh. That's not a good drawing at all. But their collarbones are like at this extreme angle. Ours, rather, are very horizontal. See if I can draw this a little better. That's not even that good. Ours are horizontal, and our bone that connects our arm, our scapula, is basically free floating aside from its attachment to the collarbone. So it has a cartilage attachment to the collarbone here, and the collarbone can sort of like move a little. And but other than that, our scapula is like free to like move around. And the reason, well, I don't know how I want to present this exactly, but this makes our shoulder like really like fluid and smooth compared to our closest ape relatives. Our shoulder is can also, it's amazingly like smooth, our movement, but this also enables us to basically, if you were looking at this from the side, like I don't know, if like this is where your arm normally is, like here on the side, that's your arm on the other side. If it's normally sort of like sitting here, sorry about that drawing. Oh, I'm even off screen. Well, if your arm is normally hanging by your side, what we can do with our shoulder, which like a jungle ape can't, see if I can repeat the exact same mistake. We can cock our shoulder back. So like, I'm trying to draw a rib cage from the side here, and it's like normally your shoulder is here, just kind of hanging. Here's like your arm, your hand and stuff. What we can do, which is kind of like a cool human ability, is your shoulder blade here, is we can cock our shoulder back. And this is handy because this gives us like our own sort of spring ability here. We can cock our shoulder back, and then we can, with the smoothness of our shoulder, we can launch a projectile, and we can do it surprisingly well. Like a practiced, conditioned human child who's like in baseball or something, or cricket or whatever you want to play, can throw a ball with 5 times the velocity of an adult chimp, which is like 25 times as much power if you convert that into the formula for power. So a human child, like a sort of high elementary primary school child can, or middle school maybe, can launch a projectile with 5 times the velocity of a super powerful chimp, which is actually 5 times stronger than a human adult, pound for pound. And that's because of this fluidness and this freedom of movement in the shoulder. But this did not come from launching projectiles. This is a huge discussion, but this ability did not come from launching projectiles. To try and condense that discussion really quickly, in order to throw a projectile well enough to where you will actually select for it naturally, you have to throw it really well. Like if this is how well like a jungle ape throws a projectile, and like this is how well a hominin human, one of us, throws a projectile. In order to naturally select for this, there has to be a reward for all these little levels in here. Like there has to be a selective advantage to like getting ever so slightly better at doing that. But it's a big discussion, but there is not. There is no reward for kind of being able to throw a spear or a rock or whatever. And rocks are a joke, like trying to throw a rock at something. Like you throw a rock at a lion, you're just gonna accelerate the rate at which it destroys you. They don't care. Even if a whole bunch of Australopithecines are throwing rocks at a lion or a Dinopithecus or something, they don't care. They're like, oh, nice rock. They're built for war. That like throwing rocks can work with like jackals, but like little smaller to medium-sized predators, like wild dogs, African wild dogs or something. But that does not work with like a hardcore apex predator. And throwing rocks is, I mean, it's a big discussion, but it's almost pointless in nature. And like apes don't even bother with it, other than like just raising a ruckus sometimes, and like, or trying to like throw sand in an opponent's eyes, or like any type of application of throwing that you can think of doesn't have ever more selective advantages. I mean, it's a big discussion, but I'm kind of glossing over that. But if you just pursue each theory, you'll see that you don't have these notches here. But so the ability to throw a projectile like a spear or something super well, the way we can, does not come from actually throwing stuff. The ability to throw a projectile well must come from a completely different activity. It's like a lot of the weird stuff we can do. Like we can kind of sort of get away with persistence hunting, even though it's like one of the most ridiculously sketchy things out there. And you can, if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Like the Tauruamara and the people who can actually do that, they don't like to do it. They're not like, oh yeah, let's go persist, like, because they know it's like one of the most insane, stupid things you can do. And the only people who kind of do it, they use like bows and arrows still. So they'll like they'll injure it and then they'll pursue it, and then they do it like really chill because they're trying not to like sweat themselves to death, and that's like going after an injured animal under like perfect conditions. And they only do it because it's like they're kind of like in a weird unnatural environment for us as humans, and it's just like this like funky little trick that we can kind of get away with under really ideal circumstances, but it's not a normal like bedrock of survival for us. It's like a lot of things. It's just weird tricks that we picked up along the way, like making spears. We did not get to where we are by making spears. We had to reach a certain level of intelligence, and then we could make the spear. We had to reach a certain level of arm mobility, and then we could throw a spear or a throwing stick really well. We did not ratchet up by doing those activities. And we do this with all sorts of stuff. Like we live in the Arctic, or we live in insane deserts, or we do this, that, and the other thing. And those are all just tricks we've picked up. We're not built to live in igloos, but we've gotten funky abilities so we can get away with it. But that's not us. We're not an igloo animal. So you probably know where I'm going with this. The reason we have such a fluid shoulder. Right there. And if you can't see what I'm pointing to, we have a fluid shoulder so we can swim. You need that real nice, fine motor control so you can gracefully do aquatic movements. Oh yeah, that's another funky thing I guess I'll point out. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm trying to draw an underwater person with their two arms out. There's their body. That's not a very good drawing. But a lot of people don't know this, but there's a form of swimming that is sort of like banned in the Olympics because it enables you to swim so fast. And it's called the underwater undulatory technique. And or like the Aquaman swim. Underwater undulatory technique. And you're allowed to use it for like a quick beat, like at the very beginning of your lap, but no more. And there's a line drawn on the lanes where you cannot use it past that line because the first person, I think it was like a Japanese guy or somebody that figured this out back in the day in the Olympics. The first person who figured this out, he would be in like a breaststroke race, but he would just jump off into the water and just do the underwater undulatory technique across the entire pool, and he would just destroy the competition. He would get all the way across and like all the way back, and he wouldn't even do a breaststroke. He would just do that the whole way and just like annihilate every other competitor. And so they're like, yeah, we gotta we gotta limit that. But that's a cool, funky technique we can do where we basically we generally sort of keep our upper body straight like an arrow, and then we move our legs in a sort of waving motion up and down, like a sort of like a dolphin. Because like fish are like side to side, but like mammals we go top to bottom, and we as humans can do that. And we can, if you develop that ability, which is very natural to us, if you just pick it up, let your body remember it basically, you can swim super fast. So you can like sprint down to a very low level in the water, forage around, and then just kind of drift back up. And these are all like really cool superpowers we have for swimming. And that's why our shoulder is so fluid. It's so we can do these really graceful, smooth, elegant movements in the water that like a brutal jungle ape has no need for. But that's where our elegance comes from. And you can get into other stuff like, why do we dance? Why do we love dancing? And at least part of the answer is to like show off to a lady, like, look, I'm really good at swimming. Kind of like, look, here's some amazing food I can bring for you. Because they've kind of supposed and theorized that the reason we dance, part of it is to like show show the ladies, mainly guys showing ladies like how good we can fight, which is like the silliest thing in the world. Like, no, like when people, tribes want to show one another how good they can fight, they do it by fighting. If you want to show someone how good you are at swimming on land, it's kind of hard to do that when you're standing up by a campfire on land on the beach. But one way is to dance, and that can sort of show off uh, your fluidity and all that. And we as males would get judged on how well we showcased that ability, and so that's part of why males tend to have this like trepidation when it comes to dancing. Tend to be very reserved and cautious, or like I could get judged on this, whereas like a woman just like goes out there like, oh yeah, I love dancing, but then a dude's like, oh no, I think I'm gonna hold back. Like that's like an echo, like an ancient echo of being judged on our ability to dance. And so yeah, this is just like a really fast crash course in how all these superpowers we have for this lifestyle. And we talked before how we like nutritionally must like eat of this world basically. And then you've got all these other traditions, like we've talked about before, how the rabbinical traditions say that the Torah was given to man in the same place that the body of Adam was made from the dust of the earth, which is another way of saying that the Garden of Eden is in the same location as the Exodus or the Sinai area, like in Africa. I guess I could draw that. I don't even think I've drawn that yet. It makes them. Oh, I've got all kinds of space over here. I didn't even realize it. You've got like Africa. Then you got like Sinai. You got these gulfs here. That's not very well done. Whatever. And then you got like your Mediterranean over here. And furthermore, Carthage should be destroyed. Not really. All right. So you got Carthage, which no one knows about. All right. So like, this is basically like ground zero for our species. This is where your first like Homo sapien Cro-Magnons radiated out from. And this is considered highly controversial, so don't be too offended. But we all, no matter where we are in the world, we all have DNA, extra DNA in us, which we could not have if we had originated from anywhere outside of this. People down here have special DNA that no one up here has. People up here have special DNA that no one down here or over here has. Like we all have this extra added DNA, and that makes it very obvious. In some cases, they actually call it ghost DNA. That makes it very conspicuous that we must have come from a common origin that is not in any of these extreme locations. You find some super old fossils and things down here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the origin. It's much more likely that the origin is more north over here. And but anyway, that's considered controversial still, but I'm just doing the best I can with what information I have. So yeah, you've got your first Homo sapien Cro-Magnons in this area, and the rabbinical traditions all saying that this is it. This is the ground zero over here for Homo sapiens, if you will. And we're talking like way back in the day when this was like super verdant and, green. And you've got a bunch of like super amazing mountains over here, some like cool mountains. So you can just imagine these mountains like totally covered in greenery, like you see at Hawaii. But yeah, so everything points to this Hawaii style origin for our species. And it's funny because Genesis and even other origins, quote unquote, myths that I haven't talked about are very resonant with that as well. That we come from a very garden-like environment. And here, I guess, is the final thing since this discussion has gone on for quite a while. And there's so much I could say. I'll get into some other stuff in some other lectures. But one of the last things I'll say with this is that the Garden of Eden story starts out as, in the beginning, the earth was without form and void, and then God's voice hovered and moved over the face of the waters, which is an interesting thing to say, because how could the earth be empty and void, but then there's water? Oh, okay, I see. What you're saying is, in the beginning there was no land. That's what that's saying. It's been hidden in plain sight, like everything, like our nose in the middle of our face and everything else, like magnetic excursion events that obviously cause everything associated with the Exodus. It's all been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years in other mind-melting things I haven't even talked about that I'll get to in other talks. It's all been hidden in plain sight this whole time for ages. But it says, in the beginning, it was water world, basically. In the beginning, it was nothing but water. And then through different creation mythologies, then land gets created by, sometimes it's like a dove or like a bird or something, diving down to the bottom of the ocean and getting some land and bringing it back up. And then God makes all land from that little sample of land. And then, but that's a fascinating origin story, because you have to ask yourself, what kind of primitive culture would tell a story that starts like that in the beginning there was nothing but water? And the only type of culture that would even make sense to is one that was used to standing and looking at something that looked like infinite water. A land tribe out here is not telling that story, that origin story. That makes no sense to them. What, in the beginning it was only water? How does that work? I don't see water anywhere. That story, the Genesis story, is a seaside story. And that's what makes it so sacred, because it's so ancient. Even if it's not precisely accurate in a literal sense in every last detail, it's still allegorically accurate. And it's still a preserved time capsule of the frame of mind of our most ancient ancestors. And that makes it sacred. That makes it that's another thing that makes it worth recording over here at Mount Sinai. And so that's what that's all about. So if you say that nothing in the Genesis story reflects anything I'm talking about, where I'm saying we lived by the sea, the answer is yes, it actually does reflect exactly what I'm talking about. That in the beginning, we lived in a place where the thought of infinite water sounded perfectly natural to us. And it's been encoded in there. I don't want to get too deep with this, but it's been left in the story for all these thousands of years in a coded way, so that it could be hidden in plain sight, so that we could eventually figure that out. But it had to be like encrypted so it could survive all of these ages and be a mystery, and then only be revealed at the right time. But so yes, the Genesis story does in fact reflect the fact that we are a seaside animal. And then this is the very last thing I'm going to say, and this is when I'm really going to offend some people if I have not already offended absolutely everyone. Hopefully I haven't, since I've shown like a commonality that we can all share, like a story of us that you can you can agree upon, even if you want to disagree about other details. Like if you want to think this is an evolutionary model or you want to think this is a creation model, we can still agree that it's this general story. And that's pretty amazing, that we can at least have that we can share in common. I call it the nexus union that we can all share together. But so hopefully no one stays too offended by this for too long. But the last thing I'll say that will indeed offend some people, which I'm not trying to do, but it is nonetheless the truth, so I will say it, is that that origin story does not make sense to a land tribe. And once we got intelligent enough to make weapons and we were able to leave our beautiful Hawaii spot where we came up, and we could go out into the land and start much more effectively surviving and getting calories, not necessarily being smarter or selecting for intelligence or being healthier or living longer, none of those, but just like getting calories, using our spears to take down like rhinos and stuff. Just kind of insane, but something one would do if it was that or starvation. You'd been kicked out of your sweet beach area because of overpopulation or whatever. You can use your newfound weapons to get calories out in these weird places, that we're not normally meant to be. But when you're out there with your knowledge of good and evil and your newfound weapons and stuff in the wilderness, what one might call being kicked out of the garden, and this might also offend some people, but we should dump the guilt associated with that, because that's like a child's, not like a pejoratively child's perspective, but like a cute, kind of quaint child's perspective of things, to think that we were kicked out because we were bad and we weren't good enough. It's like a sort of a endearingly silly child's perspective of our origins. We kicked ourselves out with our own drama and our own. We just grew up. We got too clever and too successful at getting calories where we were. So we were fruitful and multiplied. But when you're fruitful and multiply, you run up against the natural limits of your environment, and then you start fighting with other people. And you have to be, if you're too successful as an animal, you then have to become your own predator. That's why we have this weird switch that can flip in our heads, where we go from generally very agreeable to suddenly thinking other people got to die. That's because once stress gets too high in like a human or a chimpanzee, that switch flips and we're like, okay, people need to die. And that comes from, overpopulation, being very, very successful and being fruitful, multiplying, maxing out the local resources, and then conflict naturally occurs. You have competition over resources, and then we push out, we radiate into other lands and places. And then, let's see, we end up in, the land spots. And I'm just reaching here pointing here because that's where I can reach. At that point, our original story of in the beginning there was only water stops sounding like it makes sense. And if you're like a medicine man or woman or a priest or whatever you want to call them, trying to pass on the cultural knowledge to future generations, that can become increasingly difficult, because you're trying to sell them on a story that just sounds like impossible to them. And so you're going to want to modify the story for the new generation to make it hip at some point, make it more believable. Um, and so what you could say, or what some people might even say, they might question it themselves. They might be like, I've been past this story and it goes back uh, beyond time, to time immemorial before we can even remember. But, I'm questioning it myself and I'm wondering, does that even make sense? Or does this story about in the beginning, it was only water, is this only pieces of the real origin story? Maybe we lost pieces over time and there's more to it. Maybe what they're talking about in the beginning when there was only water, maybe it was a flood. Maybe in the beginning it was land like we're used to, but then this huge flood came, covered the entire world, and that's what they were talking about when they said in the beginning the earth was only water. Maybe that's what happened. And maybe, someone had to survive this global flood, so he would have to be a really righteous guy. Of course, he's a guy because we're patriarchal, so it has to be a guy. And he naturally he would need a boat in order to survive this event. He would be a righteous man. He would need a boat. He was probably a no nonsense kind of guy too. I mean, his name was probably even No Non because it was probably such a like legit bona fide dude. And so No Non, he would have had to build a boat. Oh yeah, animals need to survive. So I guess he would have just got like every animal we're familiar with: the gazelles, the giraffes, the rhinos, some parrots. Yeah, you could fit all that on a boat. Yeah, you could do that. I could see that. Okay, so No Non builds his boat, gets all his animals on there. They survive the global flood, or that covers all of the known world that we're familiar with. Not that we know about the concept of a globe yet, but all of the known world that is known to us. And he survives, and there you go. And oh yeah, when our ancestors say that the first land was created from a little bird, like a little dove, diving down in the water, swimming down with its little dove body into the water, and getting some like olive branches and stuff or whatever off the sea floor. That dove was probably Nonon's dove. Let's draw Nonon's giant boat. Yeah, that was probably Nonon's dove that they're talking about, and they just like lost that piece over time. But we're smart. We're smarter than them, so we figured it out. That had to be Nonon's little dove, and he sent his little dove out, and his dove found some land and brought it back. Oh yeah, Nonon had like a whole thing going on over here. Probably makes sense. I mean, why wouldn't he? Makes sense. Yeah, so that's what happened. Our ancestors just forgot about this because they're ignorant. They weren't as smart as us. Like they didn't even have boomerangs back then. They weren't even smart enough to make a boomerang. They were pre-boomers. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna take everything a pre-boomer says with a grain of salt. It was probably no non, and this is probably more accurate. But just for the fun of it, let's keep their version of the story around and our version of the story around. Let's keep both versions just in case, just so people can see how much smarter we are that we figured out the better version, the more accurate version, deductively. And so there you go. There had to have been a global flood, according to us, ancient people living in this period with our spears and stuff. All right, coming out of character. uh, that's how you would reason your way into the global flood story based off the original ancient Genesis story. Uh, and it makes perfect sense that you would do that. And this story of the global flood, uh, I don't mean this to offend in any way, But the more you learn about the science of this concept of the whole world being covered in water, the more sort of like blushing, the more blushed and flushed you will become, uh, symbolically, because it's so scientifically silly that you like you'll almost be embarrassed that you took it like literal. Um, but you can be forgiven for taking it literal without having that scientific background. But yeah, scientifically, the idea that salt water was covering everything, soaking into the earth, and then it just like went away, and then just immediately after stuff could grow in that salted soil, and like just so many things, like on and on and on. Also, like the largest wooden vessel ever built was the what was that, the schooner Wyoming, yeah, and she was only like a fraction of the size of Nonan's boat. And she was a beaut. Schooner Wyoming. And but she was so massive. That's not even a good representation. She was huge. Like you wouldn't even see him. Like he'd be like little, like his head there. She was a beast. Even that's not a good scale representation, but the schooner Wyoming was such a massive boat. I should have probably drawn her over here. She was such a hulk that her entire hull, and that's like a little person there on the schooner Wyoming, her entire hull had to be reinforced inside with iron crossbeams just so she could exist. And even then, she would still like hog and sag until she eventually just snapped in half completely, because this is like the absolute extreme limits of what how close we can fly to the sun with a wooden vessel. And Nonan's beast was, you know, the cubit measurements and stuff was a lot bigger than this, and this just would not have worked. Two people have built replicas, or two groups have built replicas. They've never seen the water because the engineers have been very clear about the fact that if you put that in the water, you're not getting it back. Wood is not built for that. That's why the Titanic wasn't built out of wood, because wood is an amazing material, but it has its limits. And you could go on forever about the issues with taking the global flood story completely literal. And one of the biggest ones, which is my favorite because I'm the one who figured it out, so it's my favorite. And geologists talked all kinds of smack, called me all sorts of nasty names when I pointed this out. But I don't care, because the truth is the truth. This is supposed to be North America. These are like the Great Lakes. This looks like one of the earliest maps where like everything was all disproportionate, like out of place. But like this is the Great Lakes of North America. You got Florida, you got Maine up here. You've got Canada up on top. Um, Back in the day, at the beginning of the end of the Ice Age, beginning of the Holocene, this sort of time, you had glaciers, you had Ice Age that came all the way down to this area. But as they were receding and melting, um, oh yeah, let me get off on a rabbit trail real quick. I was a huge fan, not believer, but a fan of the global flood story. Not from any religious background or anything like that, but just because I've been obsessed with human longevity and human performance and all of this sort of stuff. And and I was fascinated by the golden age mythologies that come before the flood stories, where they said before the flood it was all like perfect and we lived for hundreds of years and on and on and on. And I was like super fascinated about that. And I can make a whole lecture just talking about that. And the reason I was fascinated was because of that longevity aspect. Like I wanted to sort of try to suss out these hypothetical, theoretical conditions which would have allowed us to live for centuries like that. And so I was like super fascinated because the flood was like an avenue into the golden age mythologies. And if I could prove the flood to myself and then later to the world, then we could have a massive inroad into figuring out how to live for centuries. So I was bad about it with the flood, and you can ask people. I was like, sorry about the noise here. I was very interested in that idea, but I eventually just saw way too many of the issues and had to concede that it was not a literal event. And one of them was this. I just wanted to make that point, that I was not biased against the flood. Rather, I was all in, hoping that it would be real. But you know, once things become far too tenuous, you just have to throw in the towel and just go with what the truth points to. But anyways, one of well, my single most favorite proof that there never was any global inundation in a literal sense is what is called drumlin fields, because whenever the glaciers were starting to melt towards the end of the ice age, they one of the things that happened is you'd have these huge lakes form in the glacier area, and they would be sort of like isolated within the glacier until at some point they would breach and they would break, and then just like the most monstrous lake ever would come gushing out across the landscape, and it would cause all sorts of streamlined features everywhere. Like it would turn a regular little hill into like this nice, cool, like streamlined hill. And these are, wouldn't it be embarrassing us if I spelled this wrong? Drumlin fields. They used to teach that these were created by glaciers just grinding over hills like bulldozers. And I was like, no, they're not. This is a streamlined feature. This is like looking at it from the side, but if you looked at it from the top, it's like almost like a teardrop sort of. It's like very like aquatic and water-esque and streamlined, and they like radiate out across the landscape. They're not just like uniform like a bulldozer grinding over it, like fluting it out and stuff. They radiate. They're like radially outwards, like a sunbeam or something. And that comes from water just blasting across the landscape like in gigantic quantities, and it creates these really amazing drumlin fields. And you can go look this up and see the images, and it's like one of the coolest things ever, I guess, if you're a nerd, to like look at these drumlin fields from the air, because it's the most obvious thing in the world if you're allowing your common sense to override your other things, that you're looking at streamlined water features. And now they've stopped calling me nasty names, and it does indeed acknowledge in geology that these are caused by water, especially because how they radiate. So these are very obvious in places where the glaciers were. You can find it, like especially in this region that I drew that. But had there been a global flood, you would have these bad boys freaking everywhere. And these drumlin fields were actually formed roughly about 10,000 years ago. But the global flood, if you take everything in a super literal way, is said to have happened like, what is it, like 4,000-ish, 5,000-ish years ago or something? And so, like, you got the Rocky Mountains up here, where you should at least have 2 sets of hand warmers. And so that's like the continental divide, and then you got some Appalachians over here. Got the Appalachian Mountains over here, not as big, but you got like this sort of intermountain region, single most fruitful piece of real estate on the planet. That's another story. But if you had a literal global flood as it came off these mountain ranges, you would have drumlin fields literally everywhere. And they would be only half the age of the glacier drumlin fields. So they would just be all over the place, just all around the world. And they would be, because they are, the most obvious, conspicuous thing in the world. And that's what just kind of broke me with my attempts to try and fit the square peg in the round hole. Because a lot of people in the mainstream science fields will present all manner of arguments I haven't even talked about, and I'm not going to. They'll present that to someone coming from a creationist perspective, and they'll be like, see, there's stalactites and stuff that predate this, and the flood would have washed into these clays and snapped all these fragile stalactites off like spaghetti. Or they'll like point to all the, like, you can go on and on and on and on and on. Sorry if I screwed up the audio there. You can go on and on and on and on forever about like the features that show that there never was any global flood that happened. But if someone's coming from like a really hardcore creationist background, they can look at that stuff and they can say, well, I don't have access to ice cores in the Arctic. I don't have access to like to lake bed cores and verves. I don't have access to tree ring cores, to trees that predated the date of the flood. I've never done archaeology on the town of Jericho and confirmed for myself that it is indeed far, far older than the alleged flood date. I've never done any of that. How do I know you're not lying to me? How do I know the earth isn't flat? or whatever. Not that they necessarily would say that. But if you're coming from a really hardcore position like that, you're gonna naturally be like terribly skeptical of things like all of those arguments, and you're going to want things that are very like in your face and conspicuous, and that's why I stick to things that I don't even have to cite because they're just so obscenely obvious. And this is chief amongst them, drumlin fields. But again, it doesn't stop with that, and like the Wyoming and all this. You could go on for like virtually eternity with all the proofs that we did not literally have salt water or brine or brackish water covering the entire planet, like freaking genociding everything and just like causing all manner of insanity and reducing us down to this like insane level of inbreeding and on and on and on. Like, it's a endearingly naive story told by our wonderfully ancient ancestors trying to make sense of the original Genesis story. And so for that reason, it's profoundly sacred. One, because it preserves their perspective, which is like beautiful and fascinating from many, points of view for many reasons, but also because it preserves the original truth of the infinite waters in a veiled, encrypted way. It encrypts that truth in this story. That truth of what we once looked out on a daily basis and saw that looked like infinite water to us. So this is like a klipot, like an encryption, like a veil that hides that original truth, which is still there in Genesis and kind of veiled itself. So anyway, that's us. A Sinai, Hawaii, seaside paradise, what we would call paradise, animal. That's our garden. that's what we're made for. This is how we become healthy. People think a lot of, people in the spiritual, religious communities or whatever kind of view science and anthropology in a very skeptical way, cautious way, because they think if you go too far into that, you eventually get to like atheism and orgies, but that's not at all the case. God isn't anti-science. God is the ultimate science. I've always said that. And if you go further into anthropology and you keep climbing that mountain and you don't just stop because of, well, you don't just stop, but you just keep going up that path of like science and knowledge, you eventually approach a common peak where we can all share more and more and more in common with one another. Except it's not snow, it's just like awesomeness. It's like a peak of awesome. And we're all like on different sides and we're all disagreeing. We're like, no, it's a north face mountain. We're like, no, it's a south face mountain. Let's have wars and kill each other. But anyway, in all seriousness, the more we increase in knowledge, the closer we come to this a more and more common understanding of things. And science doesn't take you to, as I said, atheism and orgies. It actually takes you to the fact, not the theory, the fact that we are a pair bonding family animal. We are built to be in pairs together and to work together. This is where we are most fulfilled. Again, for most people, this is the average, this is the center of the bell curve. Nature likes to play around a little, so you can have some outsiders. Some people are meant to benefit the group because we have become super specialized. Some people are meant to benefit the group through things that don't involve procreating themselves. Like they could be like, kind of like in an ant colony where you have like workers and drones and soldiers, and we're not ants, but like that's kind of like we've got a little bit of that going on where we'll have people who are maybe a little more intellectual, and so they benefit the group by their inventions and stuff, but then they're so out of the norm that they don't end up procreating and passing on those glorious genes for intelligence because people consider them kind of odd. Or you can have people who are like basically built for war. Like people who like just resonate really strongly with being soldiers and stuff, not counting abuse. Usually that's from like really traumatized childhoods and stuff that people gravitate towards like the military. But I don't want to get too into that. Some people indeed are very like, it's not as common, but some people do have like sort of a hyper soldier wiring. Other people can have like a hyper artistic side, or there can be like a number of extremes that benefit the group as a whole but are not themselves meant to procreate. But we in the center, not necessarily me personally, but we as a people in the center carry the genetics to continue producing a lot of this stuff within us, so that these people can benefit the group, even though they themselves oftentimes don't necessarily reproduce on a personal level. Or you could be like an eccentric uncle that helps your nieces and nephews, your brothers and sisters get resources for their kids, and this is called group selection. This was not understood back in the day when they came up with a bunch of like false ideas like survival of the fittest and stuff, which were, understandable mistakes, but I didn't do that right. Selection. Is that on screen? Yeah. Group selection. So, but anyways, the most of us in general of our species are indeed built for this. And this is where we achieve maximal fulfillment. is in the nuclear family, and this is the most hardcore, naturally organic recipe for producing intelligence, is building like a very high quality uh, set of children that you mentor and take care of and protect. We're supposed to protect our children unequivocally until they're like 2/3 of the way to puberty. And like this idea that you make a baby tougher by leaving him to cry or her and figuring it out for himself is absolute insanity. We are mammals. We protect our children. We do not leave them to cry on their own. Again, I'll say it again. We are mammals. We protect our children, and we're supposed to protect them like that until they're about 2/3 of the way to puberty, and then we start giving them more challenging, somewhat less forgiving, tasks and things, and we mentor them and all that. That's how you build a super soldier. You don't build a stronger baby by punching a pregnant woman in the stomach. You build a stronger adult by protecting them and mentoring them and nurturing them during their formative stages. That's how you build super soldiers. Um, Soldiers like super thinkers, super healthy, psychologically well-rounded, healthy people that don't have compulsions to try and drown their psychological pain and addictions. And I could go on and on forever about that stuff, but so yeah, science takes you up the mountain, and religion ultimately takes you up the mountain to more of a common understanding of the fact that we are maximally fulfilled in these unions, and that if we try to deviate from this, we can cause ourselves a lot of pain that was not good or necessary. But anyway, so yeah, hopefully no one's too offended by the Noah's flood thing, or sorry, the Nonon's flood thing, as I like to say, because a lot of people now, if you're watching this around a quarter of a way through the 21st century, you might know that it's been a trending thing lately that to point out all of the problems with the global flood story, and to say that it debunks the entire Bible. And there's reasons I'm not going to get into why it could like a domino effect, like just debunk everything. Because you're like, well, we can prove it's not literal, and then there's like these chain reactions which cause the entire rest of it not to be literal, and not to be true and real, and we can just like finally get over this religion thing and throw it out. And so it right now it's like like if you're aware of it, it's like this fierce conflict between science and the Bible. But if you have this level of wisdom that I am now sharing, because I've obsessively researched everything forever, in the footsteps of Adam, being a good nerd for him to be proud of, I've just obsessively researched almost everything you could think of my entire life. If you do that long enough, you start to know things. There's no need to be intimidated by the fact that Noah's flood was not literal, because I've now shown you how it's actually a lot more beautiful, because there's no global genocide, there's no massive inbreeding, and it is preserving a truth which is far more beautiful and elegant, and it's doing it in a really cool way. So yeah, we can all come together, or closer. Maybe not all the way together, because we're gonna have tensions for a while, because we've had some pretty hardcore tensions. But we can reach like a Mexican standoff, if you will, where we're all like, okay, yeah, all right, that's fine. I can do that. We can do that. And there you go. That's where we come from.